In the aftermath of the Florida shooting, of course, the usual media cycle begins. The NRA comes under fire for once again another tragedy, which was obviously caused by weapons of, local mass destruction, otherwise known as guns. This time, Dana Loesch borrowed a note from Trump's playbook, going on the offensive. When you receive bad coverage, simply attack the media with a moral condemnation that the media loves mass shootings. It's my position in the debate that this statement is just politics. It is not true. And I'll begin to prove so now. First of all, let's do some setup. The first definition, the mainstream media. Obviously, the mainstream media is made up of lots of people, but they are still people. So we've got journalists, editors, cameramen, reporters, producers. I think it wouldn't be really in the spirit of the debate for my opponent to find one bloodthirsty maniac in a sea of otherwise empathetic human beings, nor would it really be fair for me to find one bleeding heart in a crowd of bloodthirsty maniacs. So I think we're looking at the overall picture here. The second thing I think we have to look at is what's the fairest interpretation of the word love, as I've struggled to define for centuries. But I think I've got two features which will be useful in this debate. I think love obviously comes with its ebbs and flows, but it is overall a positive experience. You might fight with your girlfriend every now and then, but that doesn't stop you from loving her. But the important thing is that most of the experiences should be positive. So that is to say that at the end of the mass shooting coverage, the mainstream media should look back and go and reflect on that with positivity, like that was a good thing for us. And the second thing I would say is that it should be something you want to happen again, right? So if you really do love something, it should be something which you would rather happen again. So it is my position that the mainstream media, overall, their experience is net negative when they're covering mass shootings, and it is something they would rather not happen again. Thus, they don't love them. Which leads to my first point: human empathy. I think that this is her comments are extraordinarily cynical, because it's the sort of logic which basically says if you that is to say that firemen love it when people's houses start to burn down, policemen love crime, doctors love sick people, and they love it especially if they stay sick. It would also suggest that the NRA itself loves mass shootings, because gun sales spike in the aftermath, aftermath, which often involves talk of banning guns. I don't think that any of these things are true. I think that most of the time, humans don't like mass shootings because it involves the death of other humans, especially when it involves the death of children. It sucks to have to interview a mum who has lost her child. It really sucks to know that something is happening in your neighborhood that could affect your children next. It's scary, and there's a profound sense of hopelessness, which knows that no matter what you do, no matter how well you do, likely nothing will be done. Many of these reporters themselves actually experience a financial drain because they have to get counseling for the sorts of horrors they see when they cover these things. And so overall, I stand resolved that the media does not love mass shootings.
Thank you, Ben. I think my overall contention against what you put forward there is that I think that in order to understand what she means by the word love, when we say the media loves mass shootings, we have to look at her statements in context. So I'm going to do that now. The first thing to look at is the fact that she said this at CPAC at the beginning of her speech, which was actually a 15-minute speech. So you can see the whole context throughout all the comments she made. Now, the specific quote, which was at the very beginning, says, quote, "Many in legacy media love mass shootings. You guys love it. Now, I'm not saying that you love the tragedy, but I am saying that you love the ratings. Crying white mothers are ratings gold to you," end quote. Throughout the rest of the speech, she then gives a bunch of different solutions and criticizes the media for not talking about any of those solutions, but instead simply harping on crying white mothers or people who've been traumatized, rather than actually talking about real solutions. In the next day, she was interviewed and she added, quote, "Many in the media do love mass shootings because they like the ratings aspect of it. And it's true because they give wall-to-wall coverage. They put the murderer's face up on loop on televisions all across America more than they discuss even the victims or survivors," end quote. The NRA then put out a 4-minute video in which gun rights advocate Colin Noir further explains the position, saying, quote, "The mainstream media love mass shootings. Now, I'm in no way saying that people in the media wish for the deaths of innocent people. I don't believe that at all. But whenever they get a shooting, they wring out every last episode they can to juice their ratings and push their agenda. If it bleeds, it leads, right? The mainstream media are selling millions of eyeballs to their corporate sponsors, so they cover these mass shootings for all they're worth, turning what was once an unknown sociopath into the most famous person on the planet for killing innocent people. And the higher the body count, the more the coverage," end quote. Now, when Dana and the NRA say the media love mass shootings, they're pointing out that the media exploits, dramatizes, and manipulates their coverage of mass shootings to attract ratings and pursue their agenda. For my opponent to win, he will need to show that they do not do this. For me to win, I need to show that they do. So let me show that they do. 3 basic points here. Number 1, they publicize the body count. 30 killed, 27 killed. The higher the body count, the more the coverage they get. And then they run these as headlines because they know that the higher the body count, the more people will tune in. Number 2, they release the shooter's name and image and then compare the shooter to previous shootings, which glorifies the shooter in his mind and in the minds of future shooters. This is not beneficial to the public, but they do it because it gets ratings. And third, they intentionally showcase traumatized victims, especially white victims, because that's what people are scared of. Oh no, a white person like me could be scared and could be hurt. And when they do this, they get the best ratings. What Dana is pointing out is that the media exploits these. Not that individuals are like, yay, mass shootings, but that the overall body is exploiting the coverage for ratings.
Okay, I think that the first thing to look at the context is that even in Daniel's words, they said that they love it because they love the ratings, which suggests that obviously not that the media like want people to die, but that the overall experience, as I suggested, was positive. So my opponent needs to prove that basically when the media experiences a mass shooting, that overall, because of the ratings, that kind of, it's like a silver lining in the cloud, which ends up characterizing the whole thing. I would say that, obviously doctors profit from sick people, right? That doesn't mean that their overall experience is of when people get sick is positive. Obviously, for example, disability workers profit when a kid is born with Downs, but that doesn't mean that, for example, if their own kid was born with Downs, they would be like, oh, well, more money for me and my coworkers. I would say that it is, in fact, quite the opposite, that the money is just something which, to be honest, doesn't really do it for them. I would say that actually when many, many children die, the money is the last thing on their minds, and it is not reflected in any of their behavior. So the other piece of context is that apparently there's a lot of intelligent critique for not focusing on solutions, which is just a lie, because the media focuses on solutions all the time. They just look like real solutions, like banning guns, not or banning assault weapons, not the sort of solutions which the NRA wants. But that's not really the debate, and I'm sure many Americans will vote against me because I'm Australian, just like that, for making those comments. But anyway, let's focus on to Daniel's first thing. If it bleeds, it leads. The thing is, actually, this is not true. So, for example, there's a mass shooting nearly every day in America, but nearly none of them, actually, a tiny percentage of them receive coverage. Why? Because it's actually a completely saturated story, which is only why the absolutely most tragic mass shootings ever receive coverage. That is, and is why the barrier for what qualifies as a tragedy raises. So the sorts of mass shootings which were covered, back when these things were starting to begin, they're happening nearly every day now, and unfortunately, they don't receive any coverage because it's just an old story. And the next thing as well is that Daniel talked about exploiting the coverage, but this also isn't true. So he says, for example, they show the body count as if that wouldn't be a necessary detail. What do you suggest they say instead? Some people died, many people died. The audience wants to know how many people died because they want to know how bad the shooting was. And euphemisms like some, many, several are actually just political. They're not real. It's done out of a sense of duty and obligation, not out of exploiting ratings. The next thing he says is that they give victims coverage. What's your alternative, mate? Do you think they should just go to the victims and when they want to speak about the tragedy, say, sorry, no, we can't cover you because it might be perceived like we're doing it for ratings? No, victims want a voice in the outcry of this thing, and people want to know how these human things affect real human people. So these aren't media exploiting things. This is actually just them doing their jobs. It's done out of a sense of duty. And also, if you look at, for example, the graphicness of the coverage, the media does not show things like the horror of war. They don't show the mutilated bodies. In fact, they sanitize it over and over again. And there are studies shown to support this. They focus on people who are alive, not the dead.
All right, so the first thing he said was that we have to look at the overall silver lining and that we have to look at like doctors, and doctors aren't doing anything for profit. So he's saying that the mainstream media isn't doing this for profit. Well, my response would be doctors can't be irresponsible. If a doctor was being irresponsible in a way that was keeping a patient sick so that the doctor could keep working on that patient, that would be dangerous. In the same way, if what the media is doing is contributing to an increase or a continuation of these situations, then it could be said that the media is doing something dangerous. So let's look at the actual data on this. Let's see here. So the first thing we're going to look at is an Arizona State study that was led by Dr. Sherry Towers, which analyzed the writings of mass killers as well as the time frame in which mass shootings occurred. And she said, quote, "We find significant evidence that mass killings involving incentivized by similar shooting events in the immediate past. On average, each incident incites at least 30% new shootings," end quote. Dr. Jennifer Johnston of Western New Mexico University did an analysis of media coverage of mass shootings and came to a similar conclusion, saying, quote, if media organizations were to change the way we report mass killings, we believe that we would see about a 1/3 reduction in mass shootings over the next 1 to 2 years. And we think if the would-be shooters start realizing they will only be killing themselves and no one will know their name, no one will remember them in history, we think it will discourage even more future shooters, end quote. So what we see here is that the fact that the media is reporting on it the way they are is leading to 30% to 1/3 more mass shootings occurring because the media is going about this in an irresponsible way. And that's the reason why Dana Lash says the media loves it, because they're reporting on it in ways that we already know they shouldn't be reporting on it. They don't need to release the shooter's name, and yet they do, because they know that people will tune in if they want to hear more about the shooter, more about why they would do that sort of thing. And so they do it. They publicize the shooter, which makes the shooter go, I accomplished something. And then the next shooter goes, I'm going to accomplish the same thing. It's dangerous, and the media keeps doing it. Then you talked about how banning guns is the solution. Actually, my response would be not the solution. And even if it was, there are other solutions, which is what Dana Lash was talking about. Those are the solutions that don't get covered because they aren't enough of a story. Why? Because what the media is trying to do is get ratings. They aren't talking about solutions. They're talking about ratings. Finally, he said that if it bleeds, it leads. That's not true. My response would be, it is true. And actually, I got a job as an editor for my local station. And the first thing that I heard was, if it bleeds, it leads. That's just a common mantra in the United States media. That's what they do. Then you talked about how the body count, you said that the body count does need to be known. My response, not in the headlines. You don't need to publish this in the headlines. That's part of the reason why it essentially becomes a high score for the next mass shooter. Oh, that guy got 50, I got to get 53. It's dangerous and stupid. And finally, he said that we need to give victims coverage. My response, not if they're in immediate trauma. You can give them coverage afterwards.
Okay, I guess the first thing to say is that when Daniel references my analogy of doctors can't make their patients sick because it's irresponsible. That's not the point. The point is, if a patient just stays sick, does the doctor overall experience a positive feeling? Like, for example, if more houses catch on fire, do the fire station people overall experience a positive feeling because of that? And I would say that no, right? Like, obviously it still makes them money. Like, every tragedy which needs to be fixed makes someone money because it is their job to fix the tragedy. But that doesn't mean that police love crime, right? That doesn't mean that they like to see their neighborhoods falling apart. The money is actually compensation for the overall negative experience which it takes to do that, right? As in, you're the person who has to, sit in front of the mother who's lost her child and cop that, right? Even though it will cause you mental anguish. You're the person who has to deliver the bad news, right? That the money is just compensation for what is glaringly obvious and negative thing. The next thing Daniel said is that the study, he has a study which says that the media causes more shootings. That doesn't mean that they like them, because unfortunately there aren't many alternatives to what you're talking about. Like, let's have a look at what he said. He said that, well, they can't report on the shooter's name. They can't report on the body count. Like, what on earth do you suggest this coverage look like? Mass shooting in unknown place, unknown amount of people, done by someone we don't know? Like, these details in the social media and internet age are going to get out there. And it's better for the media to do it in such a way which they don't then glorify them, because they don't glorify them. They always say that they're horrible people, and they always say that this person will be nobody. And, after it rotates in the media cycle, they don't revisit it. Who caused the last couple of mass shootings? I certainly don't remember. But point is that names and body counts are going to get out anyway. And it's just the media's job to report on those sorts of details. The next thing which Daniel said is that they only talk about gun control solutions for ratings. I think this actually makes no sense. For example, lots of Americans are against gun control. So why would you only talk about a solution which is likely to alienate lots and lots of viewers? If anything, this shows that the media is actively sacrificing an entire side of politics to do in what their minds is the right thing. If they were really ratings hungry, then they would be talking about all the solutions, right? Because they'd be pandering to literally every audience. But they're not, which shows that they're actually doing things which are anti-ratings. The next thing I like to bring up as a positive point is that ratings actually don't translate into more money for most of the people in the media. It's not like reporters are paid more if the story is highly rated, right? Like, it's not like the editors and the camera people are like, oh, that story is highly rated, here's a salary bump. That's not how it works at all. Very, very, very few people in the media actually profit from ratings. So it makes no sense that then the rest of them would be like, oh, my boss is making more money. Yes, right? Like, most people, like, they're paid the same. Like, they're on a salary or an hourly wage, regardless of what stories they cover. I'm sure that they'd much rather cover stories which didn't also involve them having to sit in front of people who have lost their children have to follow those sorts of stories. So because the ratings don't actually translate into any money for the people in the mainstream media, it makes no sense why they would then respond by loving the shootings. And I'll pass the mic back.
So the first thing that he said was that if a patient stays sick, that doesn't necessarily make the dog happy, in the same way that police don't love crime. My response would be overall results. The point of what Dana Lash was saying is that the overall results of what the media winds up doing is that it leads to them picking stories in a way that they try to get ratings from. They utilize the event that occurs in a way that tries to get ratings. She's saying this is dangerous, this is stupid, and it leads to increased mass shootings. In the same way, this is part of why I point out the fact that they're releasing the shooter's name when they shouldn't be. The NRA video that they released immediately afterwards even cut together a whole minute's worth of different media outlets specifically saying one of the perpetrators' names. And I'm not going to say it here, but because there's no reason to publicize it. The fact of the matter is, many of these shooters think that they are going to become heroes. And they are heroes in their own right. That's part of the reason why they do it. They're the people who agree with them, the other marginalized individuals, go, wow, you did it. You became famous. And that's what they're looking for. They want that sense of fame, that heroism. And when the media covers them and mentions their name, they get exactly that. So when Dana Lash says that this is dangerous, she's right. You said that the media doesn't like it. And then you asked, what can the media do? My response would be cover, don't glorify. The FBI actually has recommendations on this, which they specifically put in, and you can read about them on don'tnamedem.org. Tom Teves, whose son was killed in Aurora, also started nonotoriety.com. No Notoriety was recommended by endorsed actually by the International Police Association and the International Association of the Chiefs of Police. The point is, they're recommending that we do not release the shooter's name. If you do release the shooter's name, that gives these criminals, these wannabe criminals, this idea that, oh, we're going to be famous. All we have to do is go for a new high score, which is incredibly dangerous, and that's why it leads to a third more killings. The media's actions are dangerous. Now, you stated that the media is actively trying to talk about gun control, which proves that they don't care as much about ratings. My response would be most of the media in the US is left of center. Part of the reason why they do this is because that is what a lot of their base wants to do. You don't hear about this as much on Fox News because that's not something that Fox News would push because their audience is right. That's part of the reason that it once again comes back to ratings. You then talked about how reporters don't care about ratings. My response, we aren't talking about individual reporters. We're talking about the overall aspect of the media because that's what Dana was talking about. That's why she made this quote. She's like, the media loves this because they intentionally utilize it to try to get these ratings. That's part of the reason that they will intentionally put a camera in people's faces to intentionally try and see what they're going to go through, that trauma that they're experiencing. NBC even put a camera in front of a teenage girl whose friend had just died. No asking about her parents. Can we interview her? Just shove a camera in her face. If she cries, awesome. Ratings.
So my opponent's general case seems to be that overall, the ratings are good for the people in the mainstream media. So I'm just going to do a bit of a back and forth to see who precisely he thinks it's good for. So we agree reporters do not profit. What about like the camera people and the tech crew? Do they profit from the ratings?
If I was a camera person, I know that what I'm supposed to do is get the most interesting coverage. So that would mean I would intentionally try and get something that would get good ratings. So yes, they do profit. It's not that they're going, yay, a mass shooting, but they are going intentionally try and dramatize it as much as they can.
Their salary doesn't change regardless. Like, for example, if they're covering a war or they're covering a mass shooting, obviously more blood, but they're not paid any more than if they were just covering politics, for example. So they're not profiting from it, right?
Your job comes down to getting the best footage. And if the best footage is judged by the amount of eyes who watch that footage, yes.
Okay, my opponent doesn't know how camera people aren't paid. It's not like real estate where you're paid a commission based off the house, right? It's not like, because other, like, they don't choose their own stories. Otherwise, literally every camera person at MSNBC would be around the mass shooting place as opposed to covering every other story which they covered. They're assigned their roles and their salary doesn't change based on the thing. So it's not the reporters, it's not the camera people. What about the editors and stuff like that? So like, the producers in the media, do they get paid more? Like, are they on a fixed salary or are you under the impression that they're also in commission?
Bro, I went to a film school. I know exactly how this stuff works. And yes, it's not that they're getting a higher salary. It's that the overall company does better when they get more ratings. They keep their job stability when they get more ratings. So they intentionally publicize the body count. They intentionally put that in the headline. They intentionally publicize the shooter's name. They intentionally do things that the FBI and our police have advocated against doing because that's what they think is going to attract media attention. That's what they think that people are going to love, and people are going to give them ratings.
Talking about reporters or camera people or editors, or we're maybe just talking about producers. You're talking about the people who are making the kind of higher end production decisions. So not the reporters, not the camera people, not any of the people, or not any of the writers. So I fail to see how overall the mainstream media loves mass shootings if it's only a very select group of people who are actually profiting from the higher ratings in any way. The second thing is that the way they cover it is explicitly alienating to lots of audiences. My opponent says, for example, that, oh, well, they only cover gun control because their audience is left. But like MSNBC tries to reach out to the right all the time. Think about how they hire, for example, Joe to do Morning Joe, right? Who's an ex-Republican senator. That's clearly an attempt to gain more ratings. Likewise, how Megyn Kelly was poached from Fox News by a left-leaning organization. They do things in order to reach in to as many people as possible all the time. That's just what makes financial sense. But in this case, because it's such a tragedy, they don't, which suggests that they're not doing it for the ratings. The next thing my opponent weirdly keeps harping on about is that the way the mainstream media covers it might inspire more shooters. To which I ask relevance, right? Like, it's possible that any way you cover it will encourage more shooters, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing that with the express intention of getting more shooters to happen. Because as I explained before to no response, they have to release the name because the name's going to come out anyway, right? Like the body count, people want to know those sorts of details. It's actually insulting to the victims to be like, oh, some people died in a mass shooting which happened somewhere. Like, you know, people go to the media, journalists get their credibility, and reason people watch is because they want those details. So they're just doing their duty. So at the end of the day, like, my opponent has 2 points. One, that because the minority of people in the mainstream media profit, therefore, overall, the mainstream media loves mass shootings, which makes no sense because the vast majority of people don't profit. They just suffer, and the money is compensation. And secondly, that the mainstream media somehow inspires, you know, more shooters, which is irrelevant to the topic. The topic isn't about whether the coverage is a net positive or net negative. The topic is, it could be a net negative, and they don't love doing it. The topic is simply, do they love doing it? And I say that they don't.
And when we talk about whether or not they love it, we're talking about it in the context that Dana was making this criticism in the first place. The whole reason she said that they love it is because they're utilizing it in this way. And she's saying that's a bad thing, which leads to more problems. That's why it's relevant, because we're addressing her comments and whether or not they are accurate. They are accurate. And she's completely right to point out that the media utilizing these shootings in these ways is dangerous. Now, you stated that this is specifically alienating to the right. Well, the response would be depends on the agency. If it's a group on the left, they tend to cover it more according to the way the left would want it. If it's a group on the right, they cover it more according to the way the right would want it. The point is, either way, they want to talk about the body count. They want to talk about everything they can to try and get eyes to come to their screen, so those eyes will then see their commercials so that they will get money. That's the whole point. When you talk about like camera people and individuals, we're not really talking as much about the individuals because it's part of the broader structure. The individuals are doing what they're required to do to match the broader structure. That's why camera people, if I was a camera person, I would intentionally try and get the most dramatic coverage I could because I know that's what my boss wants. The point is that's what the structure leads to. The last thing that I want to do is I want to just talk about the mindset of shooters. The reason that this is dangerous and the reason why Dana had to point this out is because shooters are doing this because they want the coverage. Here's a quote from one of the shooters who ended up killing 10 people at his community college. He said, quote, "I have noticed that so many people are all alone and unknown. Yet when they spill a little blood, the whole world knows who they are. A man who was known by no one is now known by everyone. His face splashed across every screen, his name across the lips of every person on the planet, all in the course of one day. Seems the more people you kill, the more you're in the limelight," end quote. You can see that from pretty much any of the different shooters. When they leave behind their manifestos, they talk about how this is what they want. They want to scare people. They want to be noticed. They want to be remembered. So then when the media talks about it, the media gives them exactly what they want. It's dangerous. It's stupid. We're not saying, and this is Dana and the NRA both specifically said, we're not saying individuals want this or enjoy the tragedy. They don't enjoy that tragedy. But that what they are doing is dangerous, and what it leads to is more of these shootings. That's why they say that they love it, because they cover it in a way that gets ratings, but those same ratings are what lead to future consequences eventually. Adam Langford, a criminology professor at the University of Alabama, answered you when you asked what can the media do. He published a report titled, quote, "Don't name them, don't show them, but report everything else." He says, quote, "Many mass shooters have explicitly admitted they want fame and have directly reached out to media organizations to get it. They often compete for attention by attempting to maximize victim casualties, and they inspire contagion and copycat effects. However, if the media changes how they cover mass shooters, they may be able to deny many offenders the attention they seek and deter future perpetrators from attacking, end quote.
So you think basically the only thing this top comment means is they profit off mass shootings. That's basically it.
Essentially, that's what Dana and the NRA were both saying, yes.
Then why didn't she just say the mainstream media profits off mass shootings instead of saying they love it, you love it?
First of all, because she was speaking at CPAC, so she was intentionally talking to the right-wing base. And second of all, because that's just another way of saying that. It's just like, yeah, they love it. That's why they cover it this way.
Do all people love their jobs?
No.
Okay, so she clearly wasn't just saying that they profit, right? She was at CPAC doing quite an intentional dog whistle to say that the mainstream media have a moral character, and that moral character, that she's besmirching it by suggesting that they love mass shootings. That's why my definition is preferable in the debate, because it's actually what it means to love something, right? Like, here's another question for you. Does the NRA love mass shootings by her own logic?
No.
Well, why not? They profit off it. They react in a way which drums up fear. They suggest policies which would make them money, like armed teachers. Surely they're doing everything you say, right? They're doing things for their own money, and they do profit off it. Their stocks rise and their sales rise.
Well, we aren't really focusing on that as much. If what you're saying is correct, that they are intentionally trying to profit off of it, I would say that, yeah, and according to her own logic, sure, they would love it. But that's really not what we're talking about. And second of all, her point is more talking about the media itself. And if she's right, then that's all we're talking about here. If she's right, then the con wins.
I would suggest that there's a performative contradiction here. The NRA does not love mass shootings, and the media does not love mass shootings, because love says something more than profit. It says that it is the profit which is your guiding moral center, which overcomes your human empathy and overall makes that experience positive to you. I would say that is not true, and you haven't proven it. He says that they do it for the ratings, but he hasn't addressed my first volley of rebuttal, which is that there are lots of mass shootings which never get covered. There's a mass shooting nearly every day, and they don't receive an ounce of the coverage, which the most tragic ones do. The media is so saturated by mass shootings that they can only cover the most tragic ones because they don't get ratings anymore, because people are frankly sick of it. The second thing he says is that it bleeds, it leads, but it doesn't, right? You don't see mutilated bodies when you flick on to these mass shootings. You don't actually see the kid with the bullet through his skull, nor when you tune into war do you actually see the four horrors of war. The media sanitizes this stuff all of the time. They focus on, for example, pictures of the victims when they're alive, pictures of their families, pictures of like the school, the police tape over the front. It doesn't lead if it bleeds. It disgusts people, and it is frankly traumatizing to shoot. The last thing which I would refer back to is that even if it did make money, it's not making money for the mainstream media overall, right? He's proven that maybe there's some corporate boss up there which is getting a slightly bigger paycheck or something, but he hasn't really responded to the fact that reporters often have to seek counseling for this stuff. Camera people do not get paid more because they're paid on a salary, and they don't choose their jobs. For the vast majority of people in the mainstream media, this is just bad news. This is just yet another kid who has died and a parent who they have to suffer through. Talking about how much they miss them. There's yet another horrible thing to have heard, and they never do anything else. They don't make any money off it. There might be a tiny minority, and I don't actually think it's proven to us that they're that sick that the money is all they care about. But even if it's a tiny minority, mainstream media does not love mass shootings.
So my opponent is responding to a straw man that Dana Lash was not talking about, that the NRA was not talking about, and that I am not talking about. We're not saying as much that individual reporters are going, yay, mass shootings are happening. That's not what the point was. The point was, when the media covers it in this way, it winds up being dangerous. That's what Dana was saying. That's why she specifically said it's true, because they give wall-to-wall coverage. They put the murderer's face up on a loop on televisions all across America, more than they discuss even the victims or survivors. I have proven that that is absolutely the case, which means that her comments are absolutely true. According to the context in which she gave them, they are absolutely true. Now, my opponent wants to twist her words and say that love should mean something else, but that's not what she was talking about. It's clear what she meant. She gave a 15-minute speech about it. She then further clarified those comments later on. He states that mass shootings happen every day that aren't covered. Yeah, well, the ones that are covered are the ones with the biggest body count. That's exactly the problem. That's exactly what we're talking about here. The media is intentionally trying to focus on things that are bigger because that's what gets ratings. Now, that's not to say that they shouldn't cover these events. They should cover these events. But when they cover these events in a way that is dangerous, we have seen specific studies that say that it leads to more of these shootings in the future. That is what the NRA and Dana were talking about. This has been proven. It is clear that a con vote should be warranted because we have seen that the danger of media doing this is true. That's why what she said is accurate.